Right, this is a video on the BossOS feature list categories, and this is going to go over the different categories that BossOS is going to have for features. Although it's not going to go over the features inside those categories, it's just going to explain the different aspects. So I'm just going to basically explain what BossOS does first on its own. So BossOS is like MAMP, XAMPP, WAMP, and Nginx. It's basically like a web server package, but with everything included. So your server-side programming language, your web-based file system, so like Apache, database, so MySQL, and all little configurations and software for managing it, rather than going through command line or terminal. So BossOS is basically going to duplicate that behavior, but obviously it's going to duplicate it for a reason, because MAMP has, although it's free and open source, it does have a lot missing for the diversity of different programming languages and environments that people use now for web development. And there's also MAMP Pro, which offers extra features, but it still doesn't cover everything. Like MAMP on it currently covers PHP, Perl, and it only covers a handful of databases. And it's mainly for MySQL and SQLite. And like myself, I need to be able to use more than just PHP. I need to be able to use PHP, Perl, Ruby on Rails, Django, and especially Node.js, which is a new one. And the thing with MAMP Pro as well, fair enough, the organisation behind MAMP even existing needs to get some money from somewhere, but I believe they're going towards the route of commercialisation of their product, and I don't think it should be forced onto that for just basic tools for development. So I think it's better to just bring up a new open source project to cater for that, and especially to bring all the new frameworks and libraries and just languages together. So BossOS will cover that, but as well, if I just change the tab, you can see MAMP, when it gives you your localhost URL, that you do get a little bit of web-based configuration, but this is still quite limited to a specific port, which, unless you go into the core files of Apache and mess around, or maybe even PHP, it's not straightforward to a beginner. Or it's not necessarily a beginner, but it should be a simpler process. If you can somehow streamline a process, then you might as well do it. So, like I said before, BossOS is going to also include a web-based operating system. So what I mean by that is, I don't mean an actual operating system, I mean a virtual operating system. So you can go to a page in a browser and it'll have a system that acts like a operating system. So, a file, places to store files, and a user interface like a desktop, and applications like a desktop. So not switching from page to page, everything on one page. But also, it'll have the ability to, because I want BossOS to be able to be compatible with more than just what MAMP currently offers. I want it to be pretty much fit into place with most modern languages, frameworks, and configurations, while allowing you freedom to change them. And I want that to be able to be through software and web-based, but so you don't have to consider adding onto it to be able to add more functionality, or trying to getting stuck into a difficult situation where you're not sure what you're doing at all, and you're just trying to find anything you can find on the net to help you with it, but it doesn't help. So that's the reason behind the project, and those two aspects are the main purposes. Actually, I haven't noted it down on the blog yet, but I've got the category list available. So I'll just right. So like I mentioned before, like MAMP, I want to approach incorporating software. So with MAMP currently, you get a dashboard widget and a application to manage some very basic settings, which you can expand upon and offer a native application, but also make it available so that people can compile their own if we make it open source, and for even easier access, maybe even through the Mac App Store, if we can somehow get donations towards that. Obviously, I don't want to go the approach of, like I said before, commercialising, even though some people do sell open source software on App Store and iTunes Store to pay for their monthly, I think it's either monthly or annually cost to keep the downloads on the store. So those are two aspects. A third one is using existing technologies and, well, just basically existing files on an operating system, just to make it as efficient and take up as less memory as possible and integrate well with other software. So this project's first going to be starting on a Mac. So a way that's going to be maximised is, obviously with a Mac you get quite a lot of open source stuff pre-installed, and Macs offer quite a lot of developer tools included. So for example, Apache is already installed on a Mac, you just have to activate it. So is Python, and I believe Ruby. And there's also other languages and tools. I think it's either SVN or Git that's included on a Mac by default. I think it's SVN, although that will be incorporated anyway. And it just helps overall, and with that possibility as well, you can use the default Apple location, and some other software will be more approachable with that, such as iWeb. So you won't have to worry about where you're storing your files, and if you treat the Mac like default, it should work quite nicely together with other software. So I've just covered 4 things by mentioning the SVN and Git costs. Although this is going to start on Mac first, they eventually plan to approach to go multi-platform to obviously Mac, iOS, Windows, Linux, and possibly other mobile platforms in the future. So back to the SVN and Git. I'm also working on tools at the minute to allow web-based interfaces to use SVN and Git. Because obviously everybody knows about GitHub and several other services like Google Code and SourceForge. But there's not many solutions available, well, not on PHP, to do that on your own server. So that's quite useful for local management, because there's a lot of companies charging a lot for Git clients, which I find a bit annoying. I think it's GitX I use at the minute, but I've just decided to stick to Terminal because it seems to just cause more problems than it solves. So I'll just mention the web-based OS next, which is going to be based off iOS and is going to operate like, give you features like the map page you get with all the tabs, but it's going to be optimized for a new app ecosystem, so a web app ecosystem, which is basically apps, web apps, but are the ones that are only contained on your site, but also a lot of web-based development tools which aren't available currently in such a streamlined process. And when I mentioned the native app before, I'm also planning to implement that into widgets and other platforms. And I'm going to actually update this list on this blog, as you can see. But the other thing is clouds and backup. So most websites go through a 2-server process where they'll have a development server and a production server. But with this software, I plan to add an ability to, once you've perfected the development site, you'll have the ability to transfer everything immediately without worrying about changing any files, any database information, any settings, just by syncing them both as if they're as if it's a duplicate device in a if that's the best metaphorical way to simplify it. So just imagine that these two servers are basically just two computers, but they can copy. They both can have different files, but when you choose to, you can make one computer completely copy the other without any consequences. I'll explain more about that in another video, because it's not a simple thing to explain, but it is possible. And that ties in with the cloud. People often think about backing up as in just something you do manually, but there is a way of using a cloud to sync backups, but to multiple devices, but not letting one device be the control center of everything. So let's say one server goes down and you have two copies, but that one server was like the main site, it's still possible to restore it back. So I've only got four last things to mention. Optimized real-time activities and speed integrity. So the newest thing that's been introduced in the HTML5 and ECMA script, which is JavaScript, is WebSockets, which is a lot faster than Ajax or Comet, and it's actually powerful enough to handle real-time games. So obviously you can imagine that once that technology is easier available to servers, that everybody's going to be using it for social networking and just being able to push and pull information much quicker. So I'm planning to make that much easier to implement and much more available, rather than going through a lot of configuration settings. And with that, obviously get speed integrity, because WebSockets is faster and more efficient than the previous ones. And when I mentioned before that it's going to be using, this package as a whole is going to be using as much already available libraries or tools or frameworks available on a machine such as a Mac, pre-built in, to save on space and to save running two instances of one thing, because that's kind of pointless anyway. So, and also it's going to be all these processes are going to be compressed. So the way you're going to achieve that is just limiting unnecessary bad sloppy coding practices, or just functions which can be made much more efficient. And not many organisations do this unless the speed is critical, but because this platform's probably going to be overloaded with quite a lot of stuff, it needs to be much more efficient to cope with it. So apart from that, those are the categories of features, and although they sound like features themselves, they're just categories, because there's a lot involved in the different aspects within those aspects, if that doesn't confuse you. So I hope that makes sense enough, but you can read the blog post at mediacityonline.net/news, and it'll be posted on the 8th of June, and it'll have this title, which I'll also post a link in the video description, and it'll have everything there but just in words and very more specific details, if that helps. So I'm hoping to post more soon, and make sure to check up on it.